After 40 years of marriage, a husband leaves his wife for a 20-year-old woman, but he never imagined what his ex-wife would do. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. What's happening here? She whispered to herself. 40 years together, we gave our all to live a life full of love, care, honesty, and fidelity. What could I have done wrong for him to leave me for a woman just 25 years old? Margaret sipped chamomile tea, attempting to steady her racing thoughts. Was I too harsh with him? Did I not cook well enough? He wanted 3 sons and I gave him 4. I was always faithful, never wavering in our marriage. Margaret continued to sip her tea, tears flowing freely as she recounted the moments leading up to this heartbreak. Just minutes ago, her husband, David Turner, had returned home after a weekend away on business. Even at 65, David personally managed his companies, which required frequent travel. Yet he never traveled alone. His 25-year-old secretary, Emily, always accompanied him. With her angelic face, captivating figure, and striking blonde hair, she drew the attention of everyone. Margaret had never suspected anything about David's trips. At his age, she couldn't imagine that a young woman like Emily could possibly be interested in him. When David arrived home, he called Margaret into the living room. Margaret noticed his serious demeanor and thought something must have gone wrong at work. She had just finished preparing a delicious dinner, the way he always liked it. "What's wrong, my love? Why do you look so serious? Are our children okay? Did something happen at the company?" she asked, trying to comfort him. "Whatever it is, there's nothing a good dinner can't help improve." "Margaret, can you please stop talking for a moment?" David said, startling her with the abruptness in his voice. In 40 years of marriage, he had never raised his voice to her. Margaret sat down on the couch next to him, trying to comprehend what was happening. "David, please tell me what's going on." David took a deep breath and spoke without hesitation. "Margaret, I've fallen in love with Emily, and we plan to get married. I know she's young, but she's a kind-hearted person. I've thought about this a lot and made my decision. This isn't something rash. Emily and I have been in a relationship for almost a year now." Margaret was stunned by his words. "A relationship? How can you say that a relationship between a 65-year-old married man with 4 children and a millionaire is just? We've been married for 40 years. I've never betrayed you, and I've forgiven all your indiscretions over the years. You've always treated those affairs as nothing more than entertainment, and now you're telling me your affair with that young girl is just. Try to understand," David replied. "We've both been living a lie for some time now. I know we were happy, but unfortunately, nothing in life lasts forever. You need to accept that, even if you don't agree with it. I've made my decision. It's over, and we're going to separate because I'm going to marry Emily." Margaret was dumbfounded. This had to be some kind of joke. How could a girl young enough to be his granddaughter take him seriously? "People warned me, but I never believed it. She's just using you, David. She's after your money. Soon she'll take everything you have, your money, your companies, and leave you with nothing." David, however, was unmoved. He stood up and headed to their bedroom, where he began packing his belongings. Margaret followed him, standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, but David didn't seem to care about her pain. "Listen, Margaret, I may seem like a cruel, cold man, but I'm doing this for everyone's sake. I want you to find happiness, even if it's without me. Goodbye." David left, taking all his things to live with Emily. Margaret was inconsolable. She retreated to her kitchen to prepare another cup of tea, trying to calm herself. She began to reminisce about all the good times she had shared with David. 40 years together wasn't the same as 40 days. They had met as teenagers in high school. Margaret had been a shy girl from a wealthy family, and David was the son of the school janitor, attending on a scholarship his mother had secured for him. Despite being ridiculed by his classmates for his hand-me-down clothes and worn books, David excelled academically, his grades consistently at the top of the class. The teachers were proud of David and confident he had a bright future ahead of him. Margaret, however, was one of those who mocked David. She was a spoiled, arrogant girl who thought herself superior to everyone. Whenever David walked into the classroom, she would laugh and whisper derogatory comments to her friends. But David swallowed his pride, knowing he couldn't afford to lose the opportunity his mother had fought so hard to give him. Margaret was a good student, but she couldn't match David's dedication and abilities. Over time, she began to despise him less, though fate would eventually bring them together for life, or at least for the next 40 years. One evening, Margaret stayed late at school for a science fair that counted toward her final grade. Her driver hadn't arrived to pick her up, so she decided to walk home alone, a decision she soon regretted. She noticed a man following her. Margaret quickened her pace, but the man was faster and caught up with her. "Where are you rushing off to, sweetheart? Let's have a chat," the man said, his tone menacing. Terrified, Margaret screamed for help, but before she could finish, the man collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Behind him stood David, trembling with fear after knocking the man out. Margaret was shocked to see David there, the same boy she had ridiculed for so long, saving her from such a degrading situation. She saw the unconscious man on the ground and hugged David, who was as frightened as she was. The police arrived soon after, alerted by nearby residents, and took both teenagers to the station for questioning. Margaret's parents and David's mother arrived at the scene. Margaret's parents were amazed at David's courage and were eternally grateful to him for saving their daughter. David's mother, Laura, was frantic, as David was her only son, but she was relieved to see him safe and proud that he had become a hero. Margaret, only 18 at the time, was deeply moved by David's actions. "David, please forgive me for everything I've done to you. I know I haven't respected you and treated you poorly for months, but I feel awful about it now. I promise I'll make it up to you one day, my hero," Margaret said as she kissed David on the cheek. David blushed, not knowing what to say to Margaret, but before she left the station with her parents, he managed to utter, "I would do it again, anything to protect you, Margaret. Have a good night." Margaret smiled and left with her parents. From that day on, they became inseparable friends. Margaret's parents, despite their wealth, adored David for his humility, dedication, and courage. They learned that David was the best student in the school, with excellent grades and behavior, and that his mother, Laura, was a wonderful woman, a true example of strength. They offered Laura a job as their personal secretary, which she gratefully accepted, as it would allow her to provide an even better life for her beloved son. Over time, Margaret and David began dating, much to the surprise of their classmates, who soon grew to respect and treat David better. David and Margaret both graduated in business administration, and David soon took over managing Margaret's family businesses. Her parents trusted David completely, and he quickly tripled the family fortune. The young couple married at just 20 years old, even before finishing college, but the entire family was thrilled with their union. David and Margaret had a wonderful life together. David had always dreamed of having 3 sons, but Margaret gave him 4. David was an excellent father and husband, but over time, he became a womanizer, engaging in extramarital affairs. The first time Margaret discovered one of his affairs, they nearly divorced, but she forgave him. Despite this, David continued his affairs outside the marriage. Margaret blamed herself, but her mother always reassured her. "Don't worry about David's foolish flings, dear. He treats you well, provides for the household, and is a wonderful father. That's what matters," her mother would say. Margaret's mother was an old-fashioned woman who had tolerated her husband's infidelities as if they were normal, a mindset she unfortunately passed on to Margaret, who learned to accept her husband's indiscretions as part of life. The years passed, and the couple remained relatively happy. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary together, but their children noticed that David didn't seem as content as he once had in the marriage. They assumed it was just his age, as both David and Margaret were now 65. Besides, 40 years together was a long time. Few marriages lasted that long, so everyone thought their marriage was solid, especially Margaret. At one point, David began interviewing candidates for a new secretary, as his current one, a 65-year-old woman, was about to retire. He couldn't manage without someone in that position. He personally interviewed several candidates, needing someone with good credentials and a strong work ethic, as they would be working closely together, including on trips. In the late afternoon, after interviewing many candidates, Emily walked in. She was a stunningly beautiful woman with an endearing sweetness that could make angels jealous. Her figure was phenomenal, her perfume delicate and pleasing. At just 25 years old, she had already graduated from college, as she was highly intelligent and dedicated. Her resume was impeccable, with several professional experiences already under her belt. David was captivated by Emily and hired her on the spot. Emily was thrilled to have secured a job at such a prestigious company, but despite her angelic appearance, she was far from innocent. Emily came from a humble background. Her father had abandoned her mother for another woman, and her mother had always treated her poorly, blaming Emily for driving her husband away. Emily had only one path to escape her life: study hard. As she grew into a beautiful woman, Emily noticed that men were mesmerized by her and would do anything for her attention: gifts, money, expensive clothes, and shoes. She never had to lift a finger to get what she wanted from them, and she didn't care about any of them, convinced that all men were like her father. When Emily's mother fell ill, despite never having treated her daughter well, Emily took care of her. She loved her mother and understood why she had been the way she was, even if she couldn't fully forgive her. Thanks to the attention and gifts from various men, Emily was able to afford the best medical care for her mother. But Emily wanted more. One day, she saw the news about David and Margaret's 40th wedding anniversary celebration. The wealthy couple was well known in high society. Emily thought to herself, "What if I were David's wife? Everyone does everything for me. He wouldn't be an exception. I'm young, beautiful, intelligent, dedicated, and more. I deserve more and more out of life." She began to believe she had found the perfect husband in David. Though her mother couldn't speak anymore, Emily shared her thoughts with her anyway. As she left the room, her mother shed a tear, thinking, "Oh God, what have I done? My sweet daughter has become a monster because of me. Please, God, make a miracle happen and bring my sweet Emily back to the good girl she once was." Emily meticulously planned her seduction of David. Although she was confident she wouldn't have to do much to win him over, she wanted to be sure everything would go according to plan. Emily passed every stage of the hiring process at David's company and eventually made it to the final interview. She realized then that she wouldn't have to try too hard, as David was immediately captivated by the 25-year-old woman. David insisted on bringing Emily along on every business trip, but instead of working, she would simply enjoy herself, which David found endearing. He learned about her mother's health problems and ensured that she received the best medical treatments available. But Emily wanted more. She wanted to be David's wife, and since he was head over heels in love with her, he couldn't resist the idea of marrying such a beautiful young woman. "David, I know I'm only 25, and many will say I'm just after your money, but I'm not looking for a fling or financial gain. As you've seen, through hard work and determination, I can support myself and provide a decent life for my beloved mother. But I can't be just another affair. Either you marry me, or I'll resign and forget this ever happened," Emily declared. David promised to take care of everything, and that's how his 40-year marriage to Margaret came to an end. Margaret still held out hope that David would come to his senses, but not even their children could persuade him otherwise. They divorced, with Margaret keeping the mansion and half of the assets, while David retained part of the companies and a substantial amount of money. Over time, Margaret came to terms with the divorce and began traveling and enjoying life more than ever before. Her children supported their mother fully and were completely against David's decision. Emily began living the life of a queen, a life she had always believed she deserved. Her mother, Laura, continued to receive expensive treatments paid for by David, and over time, she regained the use of her body and voice. However, she stayed out of her daughter's relationship, believing that life would take care of everything, as she knew how it would end. Emily married David, gaining control of his wealth as well. However, she started spending money recklessly. Parties, expensive trips, designer clothes, and extravagant shoes and bags. There was no limit for Emily, and this was her greatest mistake. as life soon retaliated. David's money began to dwindle, and the once millionaire found himself living an ordinary life. The companies David was managing were still profitable, but everything took a turn for the worse when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Despite receiving the best medical care and treatments, David's health deteriorated. His children hadn't heard from him in 5 years since he had disappeared with Emily. Avoiding criticism, Laura cared for David, but eventually, he needed to be hospitalized for close medical supervision. Emily began to realize that David's money was running out, and she turned to her mother saying, "He's of no use to me anymore, Mom. We should leave him here. He's being well cared for in the hospital. He still has a little money left, but I'm young, full of life, healthy and beautiful. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life taking care of an old man." "You're just like your father, if not worse," Laura responded. "He did the same thing to me when our money ran out, and we were left penniless. You don't remember because you were so young, but he left me for another woman, one who was younger, prettier and wealthier. He probably did the same thing to her, and now I see history repeating itself. You're worse than he was. Go ahead and leave, but don't ever come back. You're no longer my daughter." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing from her mother. She packed her things and left. Time passed, and Margaret was in her mansion preparing a wonderful lunch, as she loved cooking for her family on Sundays when they visited. Then the doorbell rang. To her surprise, there was an unexpected guest at the door. "Hello, Margaret. My name is Laura. I'm the mother of the woman who destroyed your marriage." Margaret was taken aback by the woman standing on her doorstep, but she asked what she wanted. "We need to talk about David, your ex-husband," Laura said. Laura told Margaret everything, from how her daughter had schemed to how David was now bedridden. "I can't afford to take care of David, but I can help care for him. Thanks to him paying for my treatments, I'm feeling well again. I owe him a debt of eternal gratitude. I came here to ask for your help. He's bankrupt, without a cent to his name. I worked to support the two of us, as my daughter turned into a monster and left him for good. I know how you feel, Margaret, or at least how you must have felt, because I was also abandoned by Bianca's father. He left me penniless, just as my daughter left your ex-husband." The two women talked for a long time, and Laura asked if she could count on Margaret's help in taking care of David. Margaret thought for a moment and remembered the day David had risked his life to save her when they were just teenagers. He had risked everything for her that day and had told her he would do it again. "Laura, my dear, I don't hold any grudges against David. On the contrary, I still love him very much. He's the father of my children and the man who saved my life. If it weren't for him, only God knows what would have happened to me that day. He still holds a place in my heart, and I forgave him a long time ago. Let's go and bring that stubborn old man back to his home." David returned to his old home, and his children helped care for him. Though they were all married with children of their own, the house was spacious enough for everyone to stay and surround him with the warmth of a united family. Margaret invited Laura to live with them, as she had sacrificed several years of her life to help care for David alone, especially after Emily had abandoned him. Margaret paid for the best doctors and treatments, and though David was 70 years old, he recovered about 70% of his health, thanks to the person he had once left behind. In tears, David asked Margaret, "Why did you help me?" "The answer is simple," Margaret replied. "You were always there for me, even when I was cruel to you in school. I loved you even then, but I couldn't admit that I was in love with a humble boy. And you saved my life, so this is my way of repaying that. Welcome back home, David. But I hope you've learned your lesson." David wept with regret for all the times he had betrayed Margaret with other women, realizing he had had a true queen at home all along. The couple lived happily ever after, their children forgiving David for what he had done to their mother. Life returned to normal, and just as in the past, David tripled the family fortune once again. One day Laura, who had been living a calm and peaceful life with her new family, received a phone call. She went to speak with David and Margaret, telling them she had to leave. The couple understood her reasons, And Laura departed. Before leaving, Margaret gave her a large sum of money, knowing she would need it. In a public hospital far away, Laura sat beside a hospital bed and said, "I will take care of you, my princess. I will be the mother I never was to you." The phone call Laura had received was from a public hospital. Emily had been in a serious accident, and her rich husband had abandoned her, not wanting to care for an incapacitated wife. Emily cried when she saw her mother and embraced her, begging for forgiveness for everything. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.